A protest, also called a demonstration, remonstration, or remonstrance, is a public act of objection, disapproval, or dissent against political advantage. 1. 2. Protests can be thought of as acts of cooperation in which numerous people cooperate by attending and share the potential costs and risks of doing so. 3. Protests can take many different forms, from individual statements to mass political demonstrations. Protesters may organize a protest as a way of publicly making their opinions heard in an attempt to influence public opinion or government policy, or they may undertake direct action in an attempt to enact desired changes themselves. 4. 5. When protests are part of a systematic and peaceful nonviolent campaign to achieve a particular objective and involve the use of pressure as well as persuasion, they go beyond mere protest and may be better described as civil resistance or nonviolent. Resistance. 6. Various forms of self-expression and protest are sometimes restricted by governmental policy, such as the requirement of protest permits, 7, 8, economic circumstances, religious orthodoxy, social structures, or media monopoly. One state reaction to protests is the use of riot police. Observers have noted an increased militarization of protest policing in many countries, with police deploying armored vehicles and snipers against protesters. When such restrictions occur, protests may assume the form of open civil disobedience, more subtle forms of resistance against the restrictions, or may spill over into other areas such as culture and emigration. A protest itself may at times be the subject of a counter-protest. In such cases, counter-protesters demonstrate their support for the person, policy, action, etc. that is the subject of the original protest. Protesters and counter-protesters can sometimes violently clash. One study found that nonviolent activism during the civil rights movement in the United States tended to produce favorable media coverage and changes in public opinion focusing on the issues organizers were raising, but violent protests tended to generate unfavorable media coverage that generated public desire to restore law and order. 9. Historical examples. Gandhi leading his followers on the famous Salt March to abolish the British salt laws. Protesters in the middle of the road in downtown Manama, Bahrain, 2011. Protest in London over the Israel-Hamas war, October 2023. Crowds gather at the state funeral of Lee Han-yeol in Seoul, July 9, 1987. Unaddressed protests may grow and widen into civil resistance, dissent, activism, riots, insurgency, revolts, and political or social revolution. Some examples of protests include Northern Europe in the early 16th century, Protestant Reformation. North America in the 1770s, American Revolution. Pennsylvania Mutiny of 1783, an anti-government protest by several hundred soldiers of the Continental Army. France in 1789, French Revolution. Haiti in 1803, Haitian Revolution, the first successful Black Revolution against slavery. The Haymarket Affair in 1886, a violent labor protest led by the anarchist movement. New York Shirtwaist Strike of 1909. Mohandas Gandhi's 1930 Salt March to protest the colonial salt tax in India. 1963 Birmingham Children's Crusade, part of the Civil Rights Movement. 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, a key moment in the Civil Rights Movement. Selma to Montgomery Marches of 1965, part of the Civil Rights Movement. Protests against the Vietnam War. Mexico, 68. The takeover of Vanha in Helsinki, Finland in 1968. The Stonewall Riots in 1969, protesting the treatment of homosexuals in New York City. The People Power Revolution in the Philippines. 1976 Thai military personnel, police, and right-wing nationalistic militia shooting at peaceful protesters the Thammasat University of Thailand. 10. The Solidarity, Polish trade union movement's protests against Soviet communism in Poland from 1980 to 1989. June Democratic Struggle, South Korean pro-democracy movement in 1987. The Tiananmen Square protests of 1989. The Alexanderplatz demonstrations from November 4th to 9th, 1989, which culminated in the fall of the Berlin Wall. The many ACT-UP AIDS protests of the late 1980s and early 1990s. Japanese Canadians' protest of their dispossession. The Seattle WTO Ministerial Conference of 1999 protest activity against the World Trade Organization. Anti-globalization protests in Prague in 2000. Anti-globalization protests in Genoa from 18 to July 22, 2001. February 15, 2003 Iraq War protest. Anti-nuclear protests. 2007 Bursi rally. 2010 Thai political protests. 2011 Iranian protests. Arab Spring protests. Impact of the Arab Spring. Occupy Wall Street protests. Bursi Malaysia protests. Gezi Park protests in 2013 in Turkey. June 2013 Egyptian protests. Euromaidan protests in Ukraine, November 2013 to February 2014. Black Lives Matter-led protests on July 13, 2013. Sunflower Student Movement. Add the words gay and transgender rights protests in Idaho in 2014. 2014 Hong Kong Umbrella Movement. 2016 South Korean protests. 2017 Jakarta protests. 2017 to 2019 Romanian protests. Dakota Access Pipeline protests. 2018 Tommy Robinson protests. 2018 Sadiq Khan protests. March for Our Lives protests. 2018 Armenian Velvet Revolution. 2018 to 2019 Sudanese protests. 2018 to 2020 Serbian protests. 2019 Venezuelan protests. 2019 Indonesian protests. 2019 Bolivian protests. 2019 to 20 Hong Kong protests. Citizenship Amendment Act protests. 2019 to 20 Lebanese protests. 2019 to 2021 Iraqi protests. George Floyd protests. 2020 to 21 Belarusian protests. Protests over responses to the COVID-19 pandemic. COVID-19 protests and riots in Serbia. 2020 Thai protests. 2020 to 2021 Indian farmers protest. 2020 to 2021 United States election protests. Masa Amini protests. Protests against the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Peruvian protests, 2022 to 2023. 2024 Columbia University pro-Palestinian campus occupation. Forms. See also. Repertoire of contention. Protester with a Free the Bee placard during the COVID-19 protests in Berlin on 29 August, 2020, near the Brandenburg Gate. A protest can take many forms. 11-12 Willingness to participate is influenced by individuals' ties within social networks. Social connections can affect both the spread of factual information about a protest and social pressures on participants. 3 Willing to participate will also vary depending on the type of protest. Likelihood that someone will respond to a protest is also affected by group identification and by the types of tactics involved. 13. The dynamics of Collective Action Project and the Global Nonviolent Action Database, 14, are 2 of the leading data collection efforts attempting to capture information about protest events. The dynamics of Collective Action Project considers the repertoire of protest tactics and their definitions, to include frowny face 15. Rally or demonstration. Demonstration, rally, or similar protest, without reference to marching or walking in a picket line or standing in a vigil. Reference to speeches, speakers, singing, or preaching, often verified by the presence of PA sound equipment and sometimes by a platform or stage. Ordinarily will include worship services, speeches, briefings. March. Reference to moving from one location to another, to distinguish from rotating or walking in a circle with picket signs, which is a picket. Vigil. Most vigils have banners, placards, or leaflets so that people passing by, despite silence from participants, can be informed about the purpose of the vigil. Picket. The modal activity, clarification needed, is picketing. There may be references to a picket line, informational picketing, or holding signs. Welcome to this video. Carrie. The date of filming is January 20th, 2025. We are in San Marcos, Texas downtown on the square. This gathering of humans is pertaining to pro-Palestine and anti-Trump demonstration. Isn't it weird how the word demonstration has the word demon in it? Haha. Anyway, they protested with a bullhorn for about 30 minutes on a very, very cold Texas day, about 0 Celsius or 32 Fahrenheit. They eventually took the protest on the move, and you will see that shortly. Enjoy! Welcome to this video. The date of filming is January 20th, 2025. We are in San Marcos, Texas downtown on the square. This gathering of humans is pertaining to pro-Palestine and anti-Trump demonstration. Isn't it weird how the word demonstration has the word demon in it? Haha. Anyway, they protested with a bullhorn for about 30 minutes on a very, very cold Texas day, about 0 Celsius or 32 Fahrenheit. They eventually took the protest on the move, and you will see that shortly. Enjoy! Welcome to this video. The date of filming is January 20th, 2025. We are in San Marcos, Texas downtown on the square. This gathering of humans is pertaining to pro-Palestine and anti-Trump demonstration. Isn't it weird how the word demonstration has the word demon in it? Haha. Anyway, they protested with a bullhorn for about 30 minutes on a very, very cold Texas day, about 0 Celsius or 32 Fahrenheit. They eventually took the protest on the move, and you will see that shortly. Enjoy! Welcome to this video. The date of filming is January 20th, 2025. We are in San Marcos, Texas downtown on the square. This gathering of humans is pertaining to pro-Palestine and anti-Trump demonstration. Isn't it weird how the word demonstration has the word demon in it? Haha. Anyway, they protested with